me! I'm drowning!
Grip! Pull! You've almost got him. Yes, he's safe.
The River Gorgi ran dark and fast that Thursday afternoon, churned up from 2 days of rain upstream, the kind of water that did not forgive mistakes. On its eastern bank, where the city's older market district pressed right up against the waterfront, the usual crowd of late-afternoon vendors, errand runners, and idle observers moved in the familiar patterns of a city going about its business without particularly watching anything. Nobody was watching the man in the wheelchair near the steep section of the bank where the ground leveled badly and the edge crumbled away into muddy nothing. Nobody, except a 16-year-old boy named Adamu Sule, who had stopped instinctively because something about the scene did not sit right with him. The wheelchair was too close to the edge, and the attendant who was supposed to be standing beside it was gone. Adamu pulled out his phone. He pressed record. He did not know, in that moment, that those 22 seconds would be seen by 4 million people before the sun rose again. The wheelchair moved, not dramatically, not all at once, just a slow, terrible inch forward, and then another, as the ground beneath the left wheel gave way at the crumbling edge. The man in the chair reached for the wheel rim with both hands, trying to stop the slide, but the angle was wrong, and the bank was wet, and the river below did not negotiate. He went into the water. Subscribe to Titan Tales right now and turn on your notification bell so you never miss a story like this one. Drop your country in the comments too. We want to know where in the world you are watching from. No crash. No scream, just a sudden disappearance, the way a candle goes out, and then the sound of the water closing over the place where a human being had just been. The crowd at the edge took 3 seconds to form, then the phones came out, then the voices, overlapping, urgent, useless. There is someone in the water. He cannot swim. And then the voice that changed everything. Quiet, carrying. The kind of voice that says something once and does not repeat itself. That is Alhaji Ibrahim's son. The silence that followed was not the silence of people who had not heard. It was the silence of people who had heard perfectly and had now, in the space of one breath, performed a calculation. The calculation every ordinary person runs when power enters a room. What happens to me if I get involved? What happens if I get it wrong? What does that name mean in this city, in these courts, in the back rooms where decisions about ordinary people's lives are made without them? What happens to someone who touches that family without permission? Nobody moved. 20 seconds passed. 30. The river churned where he had gone under. There was movement beneath the surface, a shape trying to rise, trying to find direction, running out of time. Adamu's hand on his phone was shaking. And then, from the edge of the crowd, someone's basket hit the ground. Amira Sewell did not make a speech. She did not look around to see who was watching. She simply calculated, in the half-second that any honest person will tell you is all the calculation heroism ever gets, and she ran. She ran the way someone runs when they have already decided, and the only thing left is the doing. She did not break stride at the bank's edge. She went in. The river hit her like a wall, cold and dark and disorienting in the way that water always is when it surrounds you from every direction and takes away your up and your down. Her lungs seized with the shock of it. The current pulled sideways in a way she had not expected. But she had grown up watching her mother carry impossible things. She had spent 23 years learning to move through resistance. The water was just another version of the same lesson. She found him. He was below the surface, fighting, arms working, but his legs unable to contribute, his body disoriented in water that did not care about the Ibrahim name or the Ibrahim money, or the Ibrahim Group's 30 floors of glass offices that looked down on this city from above. He was simply a man drowning. She locked her arm under his. She kicked. He felt her, and instead of panicking harder, something in him responded. He held on. He could not see her. He did not know her. But he held on the way people hold on to unexpected things in the dark, with everything they have. The bank seemed unreachable. Then a man on the edge, shamed finally by the sight of a woman doing what he had not, extended a wooden pole from a vendor's stall. She grabbed it. She held on to it and to the man simultaneously, and she did not let go of either. They were pulled in. Amira collapsed on the bank, her chest heaving, her clothes soaked and heavy. The man beside her was coughing up river water, his eyes unfocused, his body wrecked. She rolled him on his side, the way she had once seen someone do at the market during an emergency. More water came out. He coughed harder. And then he breathed. he breathed. She pressed her palm against the ground and pushed herself to sitting. She was shaking, soaked. Scattered peppers from her fallen basket were visible at the crowd's edge, crushed under feet that had moved to watch without helping. The man opened his eyes, and he looked at her. He looked at her the way no one had ever looked at Amira Sool in 23 years of being exactly who she was, as if she were the most extraordinary thing he had ever seen, and he could not explain why, and he did not need to. She looked back at him. She was exhausted and wet, and her arm ached. Somewhere in the crowd, her younger brother was still recording with a shaking hand. "You're safe," she said. Those were the only words. She did not know in that moment what had just begun. Welcome to Titan Tales, besties. Please like, share, and subscribe. The convoy arrived 7 minutes after Zaid went into the water. 7 minutes was long enough for Amira's clothes to begin drying at the edges. Long enough for the crowd to rearrange itself from silent witnesses into loud spectators, their voices now full of the energy that courage had been too expensive for earlier. 7 minutes was long enough for 3 different people to begin recording the girl still sitting on the bank next to the man she had pulled from the river, picking herself up from the ground with the quiet efficiency of someone who did not have the luxury of dramatic recovery. She was back on her feet before the black SUVs stopped. Alhaji Usman Ibrahim stepped out of the lead vehicle with the deliberate unhurry of a man who had never needed to rush because everything and everyone waited for him. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, immaculately dressed in a gray kaftan that managed to look both traditional and expensive at the same time. His face was controlled in the way that power always controls the face. No panic visible, no relief visible, only the careful calculation of a man managing a situation. He went to his son first. He crouched beside Zaid, ignoring the mud at the bank's edge entirely, and placed one large hand against the side of his son's face. "Are you hurt?" he said. His voice was low. Nobody else heard it. Zaid blinked up at him. "I fell," he said. Alhaji's jaw tightened once. Then he straightened. His eyes moved across the bank and found Amira. She was watching him without expression. Her clothes were soaked and her head wrap was coming undone, and she had a scrape on her left forearm from the wooden pole. She was not performing anything. She was simply standing. He studied her the way a man studies something he does not yet have a category for. "You went into the water," he said. "Yes," she said. "Why?" She did not blink. "Because he was drowning." A long silence fell. Around them, the crowd pressed forward. Security formed a perimeter without being told. Alhaji looked at her for another moment, searching for the angle, the calculation, the thing being asked for. He found nothing. Just a wet girl who had answered a question he had not quite asked. "Take him to the hospital," he said finally. Then, quietly to one of his men, "Get her information." Before the convoy left, a man Amira did not know approached her with an envelope. "The Alhaji wishes to express his gratitude," the man said smoothly. Amira looked at the envelope. She looked at the man. She held it back out to him. "I didn't do it so he could pay me," she said. The man blinked. This was not a response he had prepared for. He tried again. She said no a second time with her eyes alone, which was apparently enough. The convoy pulled away. In the rear vehicle, barely conscious, propped against the leather seat with a blanket around his shoulders, Zaid Ibrahim watched through the darkened window as Amira turned back toward the bank where her basket had fallen. She crouched down and began picking up her scattered peppers from the dirt, one at a time, unhurried, as if nothing had happened. He watched her until the vehicle turned and she was gone from view. He pressed his head back against the seat. He could not explain what moved through him in that moment. It was not gratitude exactly, though gratitude was part of it. It was something older and stranger, something that felt like recognition, like he had been looking a long time at something without knowing it and had finally, accidentally, found it. He closed his eyes, but her face stayed behind them. That night, the video reached 200,000 views before midnight. Adamu's 22 seconds of footage, the basket hitting the ground, the girl disappearing into the water, 200 people standing with phones raised and not one of them moving, traveled across platforms with the specific velocity that only genuine moral outrage can generate. The comments were not about the rescue, they were about the crowd. 200 people. They knew whose son it was and they were afraid. A poor girl with nothing saved a billionaire's son while rich people filmed it. Amira saw none of this. She was at home, seated beside her mother's sleeping form, her arm bandaged where Adamu had cleaned the scrape with materials that cost more than she wanted to admit. Her brother sat across from her, his phone face down on the floor. "You knew who he was," Adamu said. It was not a question. "Yes. And you jumped anyway." She did not answer immediately. The room was small, and the single bulb above them threw shadows that made everything look like a different century. "He was drowning," she said finally. "Whatever else he is, a drowning person is just a person." Adamu studied his sister for a long time. Then he said quietly, "The video is everywhere." Amira looked at her bandaged arm. "So is the river," she said, "and neither of them is going anywhere tonight." She stood. "Go to sleep." At the hospital on the opposite side of the city, Zaid Ibrahim was not sleeping. The private ward was quiet and white and expensive in the particular way that private wards are. Everything designed to communicate that you are being taken care of. Everything designed to prevent you from thinking too clearly about what brought you here. He had been treated for water inhalation, checked for concussion, given fluids through a line in his arm. His mother sat beside his bed. Hajia Maryam, 53 years old, fine-boned, still beautiful in the way that women who carry quiet grief for years sometimes are, the weight of it shaping them into something harder and more refined than comfort would have allowed. She had arrived before anyone else, which meant she had been waiting for a call she had half expected. She held his hand and said nothing for a long time. "A girl," Zaid said eventually. His voice was rougher than usual, scraped by river water. "I know," his mother said. "From the market. She had peppers in her basket." Hajia Maryam looked at her son's face. She had not seen that particular light in his eyes in a very long time. She could not decide whether it terrified her or relieved her. Perhaps both. "Your father is speaking to his people," she said carefully. Zaid turned his head. "He came to the bank," he said, as if testing the weight of that. "He came immediately." A pause. "He came to the bank," Zaid said again. "Not to this room, not yet, but to the bank." That was something. "Sleep," his mother said. She did not let go of his hand. The next morning, Amira was at her stall by 5:30. The market did not pause for anything. Not for viral videos, not for rivers, not for the particular exhaustion of someone whose body had decided in the night that the previous day's events were worth processing in full. Every muscle registering protest. Her arms stiff and sore. Her chest still holding the phantom tightness of cold water. She set up her goods in the early morning dark and told no one what had happened. The stares began shortly after sunrise. Two women near the water stand looked at her, then at each other, then back with the specific expression of people who have recognized someone from a video and are deciding how to behave about it. A man who bought from her every morning stopped and said simply, "You were there." She said yes. He studied her. Then he said quietly, "Not many would do that." She said nothing and began arranging her goods because the market waited for no one. By midday, the black car arrived. Everyone on the lane saw it. Clean, dark, unmarked in the particular way that expensive things are unmarked when they do not need to advertise. Two men stepped out, precise, eyes moving. They found Amira's stall without asking for directions. "Amira Sul," one of them said. "Yes," she said. "You are requested." A brief pause. "By Alhaji Usman Ibrahim." The market went quiet around her the way a held breath is quiet. People nearby turned without appearing to turn. Adamu, who had come to help and had been watching from 3 stalls away, went very still. Amira looked at the men. She looked at her stall. She looked at Adamu. "Watch the goods," she said. He nodded. His eyes said 1,000 other things. She got in the car. The Ibrahim compound was behind walls that Amira had passed the outer edge of perhaps 100 times without thinking about what was inside them. Now, as the gates opened and closed behind the vehicle, and the sounds of the city were replaced by the specific quiet of controlled space, she understood the purpose of those walls differently. They did not keep people safe. They kept the world out. And the thing about keeping the world out was that it also kept certain truths in. She entered through the main doors with her back straight and her face still. She was shown to a sitting room, and then Zaid Ibrahim came in. She had not seen him clearly at the waterfront. She had been too busy keeping both of them alive. Now she looked at him properly for the first time. He was in his chair, wearing a simple gray caftan, his hands resting quiet on the armrests. His face was the kind of face that had clearly been handsome before life had added something more complicated, a carved, considered quality, like someone who had learned to hold everything internal. His eyes were dark and precise, and moved directly to her the moment he entered, as if they had been looking for her. "Amira Sul," he said. "Yes. Sit down, Please, she sat. The sofa was cream-colored and probably cost more than 3 months of her mother's medical bills. She sat on the edge of it, upright, because she was not here to be comfortable. Thank you, he said. You don't need to. I know. A pause. I'm saying it anyway. She looked at him directly. He looked back. Neither of them was performing anything. In a house full of staff and security and calculated silence, this man had simply walked in and begun speaking the way real people spoke, without management, without performance. Did you know who I was? He said. She held his gaze. Yes. Something moved across his face. Not surprise, something quieter, and you still jumped. She did not answer, because it was not a question. They were left alone for perhaps 12 minutes, long enough for what had begun as a formal acknowledgement to become something else entirely. He asked her about the market, not with the curiosity of someone examining a different species, but with the attention of someone genuinely trying to understand a world he had been separated from. She answered plainly. She did not soften anything or make herself smaller. She did not make herself larger either. He watched her the whole time. Not the way men sometimes watched Amira, with the calculating appraisal that always carried an agenda she would have to deflect. He watched her the way someone watches a person they are trying very hard to memorize, as if she might disappear, and he needed to know exactly what to look for to find her again. She noticed. She said nothing about it. When she stood to leave, he said, "Your arm." She looked at the bandage. "It's fine. You scraped it on the pole coming out of the river." "I know. I was there." Something flashed in his expression, amusement, and underneath it something much warmer than amusement. "Yes," he said quietly, "I know you were." She left before she could become too aware of the way he was still looking at her when she turned toward the door. In the corridor outside, Hajia Mariam was waiting. She did not look like a woman who had placed herself there accidentally. She studied Amira for a long moment, the full measure of a woman who had learned to read people quickly, because in this house quickly was the only speed that mattered. "I know what you risked," she said. Her voice was low. "I know what you did not ask for in return." Amira met her eyes. "I did not risk anything for a return. I know." A pause. "My son has not had someone look at him the way you looked at him in that room in a very long time." She slipped a card into Amira's hand. "A phone number, no name. If anything becomes difficult, you call this." Amira looked at the card. She looked up. "Why would anything become difficult?" Hajia Mariam looked at her with the expression of a woman who knew exactly how to answer that question and had decided it was kinder not to. She touched Amira's good arm once, gently, and walked back the way she had come. Rakia Ibrahim had been watching the exchange between Zaid and Amira from behind a partially open door at the far end of the corridor. She watched the girl's posture, the girl's face, the way Zaid had looked at her for 12 uninterrupted minutes. She had been managing this household for 11 years. She had positioned herself, her son, and her future with the careful patience of someone who understood that power in a house like this was not seized. It was accumulated. Quietly, through loyalty and proximity, and the slow, careful erosion of other people's importance. Zaid had always been manageable, invisible, contained within his room and his disability and his father's carefully constructed shame. This girl was not manageable. Rakia pulled the door closed. She called Bashir. The girl was inside today. "I know," he said. "Make sure she understands that coming back is not in her interest." A brief silence on the other end. "And if she doesn't understand that?" Rakia watched the closed door. "Then we will have to be more specific," she said. 3 days later, Alhaji Usman Ibrahim summoned his son to his office. Zaid arrived to find his father standing at the window overlooking the compound's central courtyard, hands clasped behind his back. On the desk between them was Zaid's laptop, open. The Kua dashboard was on the screen. 3 years of growth, a real company, real users, real revenue. The silence in the room was the specific silence of a man recalibrating. "When did you start this?" Alhaji said. It was not a question. 3 years ago, Zaid said, "when I stopped waiting for you to see me." The words landed in the room like stones dropped into still water. Alhaji did not turn immediately. He looked out at the courtyard for a long moment. Then he turned and he looked at his son. Really looked, the way he had stopped allowing himself to look years ago because looking had become too uncomfortable. And he saw something he had not given himself permission to see. His son was extraordinary. 3 million users, Alhaji said. 3.4, Zaid said, as of this morning. Another silence. This one different, softer at the edges. "You should have told me," Alhaji said. Zaid held his gaze. "I should not have needed to hide it in the first place." Alhaji had no answer for this. He sat down. He looked at the screen for a long moment, and inside that moment something began. Not a full reckoning, not yet, but the first hairline fracture in a wall of pride that had been built so long ago neither of them could clearly remember the beginning of it. Later that week, a package arrived at Amira's house. She did not recognize the delivery company. The package contained a medical supply kit, 3 months of her mother's blood pressure medication, and a card that read, "For the woman who raised someone like you." No signature, no explanation. Amira stood in her small sitting room holding the card for a long time. Then she looked at Adamu, who said nothing, which meant yes. She put the card down. She began making her mother's morning meal because whatever the gesture meant, her mother still needed to eat, and the market opened in an hour. But her hands were not quite steady. She kept glancing at the card on the table as if it were going to say something more. It didn't. But it didn't need to. She already understood what it was saying. The messages began 2 weeks after the rescue. Zaid had obtained her number through channels she did not ask him to explain. She had stared at the first message for a long time before answering. "How is your arm?" "Fine." "How are your lungs?" His response came quickly. "They have forgiven you." She had not responded to that one for 20 minutes. Something about the quiet humor of it, the warmth beneath it, required her to sit with it before she trusted herself to answer plainly. Their communication grew slowly, not dramatically, the way two careful people move toward each other when both of them have good reasons to be careful. She told him about the market. He told her about Kua, about why he had named it what he named it, about the 3 years of late nights and workarounds, and the particular satisfaction of building something real when the world outside your 4 walls had decided you were nothing. She listened. She did not offer false encouragement. She told him exactly what she thought, which turned out to be something he had not had enough of in his life. He called her, the first time, on a Tuesday evening. He did not say hello. He said, "I want to tell you something." She said, "Then tell me." He told her that before the river, he had been disappearing. Not physically, but the kind of disappearing that happens when nobody sees you for long enough that you begin to wonder if you actually exist. And then she had appeared above him in the dark water, not because she had been sent, not because it benefited her, and the first thing he had known about her was that she had chosen him. He had not said all of this out loud until that Tuesday evening, and saying it felt dangerous. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You existed before I jumped in. You just didn't know it yet." He said nothing for a long time after that, but she kept the phone against her ear and heard him breathing, and she let that be enough. A few days later, Rakia's campaign reached the market. It began the way these things always begin, in the mouths of people Amira had known for years. A woman who bought from her stall every morning began asking pointed questions. "Is it true you went back to the compound? They say you were alone with him for almost an hour." These rich families don't take kindly to girls who get ideas. By the 3rd day, the tone had shifted. She knew he would be there. She planned the whole thing. She refused the money publicly so she could ask for more privately. These kinds of girls always have an angle. Amira said nothing. She arranged her goods and made her sales and said nothing. But on the 5th day, a young man she did not know arrived at her stall. Handsome, well-dressed in the careful way of someone who spent money on appearance, with a smile deployed with the ease of someone accustomed to it working. "You are Amira Sul," he said. "I am. I have seen your video." He leaned on her stall counter with the ease of a man who had never been told no. A woman with that kind of courage deserves to be taken somewhere nice. She was about to answer when her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Zaid. She looked up at the man. "I am busy," she said. He smiled wider. He began to say something else. She looked at her phone again. She did not know then that Zaid was watching. He had come to the market. He had not announced it. One vehicle, no convoy, because he had learned from his mother how to move quietly through spaces that did not expect him. He had come because 3 days without seeing her had made the messages insufficient, and he had not yet examined that fact carefully enough to understand what it meant. He had come around the corner of the market lane and seen the man leaning on Amira's stall counter and had gone very still. He watched the man smile at her. He watched her look at her phone. His message, he knew it was his message, and watched something move across her face that was too brief and too complicated for him to fully read. And something moved through Zaid Ibrahim that he did not immediately have a word for, though his hands had tightened on the armrests of his chair, and his jaw had set in a way that Hajia Mariam would have recognized without being told. He waited. When the man finally left, unsuccessfully, Amira looked up from her stall and across the lane, and she saw him. She went very still. He wheeled himself toward her. He stopped in front of the stall. He looked at her and said nothing for a moment. "You came," she said. I was in the area, he said. It was the most obvious thing either of them had ever heard, and they both knew it, and neither of them addressed it directly. Who was that? He said. She looked at him. The question was careful on the surface. Underneath it was not careful at all. She could see that clearly. I don't know, she said. He left. I saw, Zaid said. Then, quieter. I didn't like it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she handed him a small bag of ground nuts across the stall counter, the way she handed them to any customer, and she said, "Then it's fortunate that he left." He did not leave the market for another 2 hours. He stayed and talked to her between customers and handed her things when her hands were full, and he watched the market move around her with the full attention of someone cataloging something they did not want to forget. And Amira let him stay, which was its own kind of answer to a question neither of them had quite asked yet. By the time he left, 3 stallholders on the lane had seen them together. By the next morning, all of the market knew. And by the morning after that, Rakia Ibrahim knew as well. The threats escalated. Amira's regular vegetable supplier, a man she had bought from for 4 years, told her quietly that he could no longer sell to her. He could not look at her when he said it. She understood what that meant without asking. She found another supplier and mentioned the incident to nobody. 3 days later, a man she did not recognize stopped her on her way home in the evening. He did not touch her. He spoke quietly. He told her that her involvement with the Ibrahim family was noted and that she should consider whether it was worth the cost. He mentioned her mother. He mentioned Adamu's school. Amira walked home very fast. Her hands were shaking. She did not call Zaid. She sat in the dark of her house for a long time, and she thought about the woman at the market who had said 3 weeks ago, "These rich people forget quickly." And she thought about whether she had made a terrible mistake, not by jumping into the river, but by agreeing to everything that came after. She almost convinced herself, and then her phone rang. Hajia Mariam. "Something has happened," the older woman said. "Come to the side gate tomorrow, early. Come alone." She went. Hajia Mariam met her at the gate herself, not a servant, not a guard. She led Amira through a path along the compound's inner garden that avoided the main building entirely. They sat in a section of the garden that was quiet and old and entirely removed from the household sightlines. "I know about the man who stopped you last evening," Hajia said. Amira looked at her sharply. "How?" "My son has people whose only job is to watch what happens to you when he cannot be there himself." Hajia's expression was complicated. Pride and worry and something deeply maternal all at once. "He does not know you were approached. I am telling you so that you can decide how much of this you want to carry alone." A silence fell between them. "Rakia," Amira said. "Yes. She is afraid of what I mean to your son." Hajia Mariam looked at her carefully. "He has been alive differently since the river, Amira. I have not seen him like this since before the accident." She held her gaze. "You should know that." Amira looked at the garden. The morning light was gold across the old flower beds, and somewhere in the compound's upper floors, she knew, a man with dark, precise eyes was awake and probably thinking about a market stall at the same time he was looking at a startup dashboard. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" she said quietly. Hajia Mariam put her hand over Amira's. "Whatever you decide," she said. "I will not ask you to risk yourself for his happiness, but I wanted you to know that you are not alone in this." The argument happened on a Wednesday evening. Zaid had been watching Amira more closely since the incident at the market. His messages had become more frequent, his questions more pointed. When she arrived at the compound that afternoon, officially to consult with his physiotherapy team on a wellness program that Zaid had invented as a reason to keep seeing her, he was waiting in the garden, and the moment she sat down, he said, "You're not telling me something." She looked at him. "I tell you many things. You're not telling me everything." She said nothing. "Someone has approached you," he said. His voice was quiet, but the quiet had an edge. "Someone connected to this house." She looked at him. She had promised herself she would not bring this to him because she had spent 23 years solving her own problems. But there was something in the way he was looking at her, not with the expectation of a rich man who expected obedience, but with the raw concern of someone genuinely afraid for her, that made the planned response dissolve. "A man stopped me 2 nights ago," she said. "He mentioned my mother and my brother brother. Zaid's stillness was different from his usual stillness. This was the stillness of something held very tightly under enormous pressure. "And you didn't tell me," he said. "I handled it. Amira, I handle my own problems, Zaid. I have been doing it since I was 15 years old. This is not your problem to handle alone," he said. "This is my house. These are my people. Whatever is happening to you is happening because of me, and I will not sit here and—" "You will not what?" Her voice was sharp now, because something she had been carrying for weeks was suddenly very close to the surface. "You will not let the poor market girl manage her own life? You will ride in and protect me, and then what? I go back to my stall and you go back to your compound, and the distance between those two things remains exactly what it has always been." He went quiet. Not the retreat kind of quiet, the absorbing kind. "Is that what you think this is?" he said. "I think you are a good man," she said. "I think you are not like what I expected. I think—" She stopped, started again, quieter. "I think when you look at me, you see something I am not sure is actually there." "Tell me what you see," he said. "When you look at me." She met his eyes, and the answer was there, visible for half a second, before she pushed it back down. She stood. "I need to go," she said. She was still in the garden. She had not quite made it to the gate because her legs had stopped cooperating near the old rose bed at the garden's far end, where the light was amber and low, and the sounds of the compound were distant and muffled. She was standing very still with her back to him. She heard the quiet sound of his chair on the stone path. He stopped behind her. Close. She could feel the warmth of his presence in the space between them. Neither of them spoke. "I see someone who chose me," he said. His voice was low enough that she had to be completely still to hear it. "In 30 seconds, with no information and no guarantee, you chose me. Not because of my name or my money or my family, because I was a person in trouble. That is the thing I see when I look at you. Not a market girl, not a rescue story, not someone who belongs to a different world." A pause. "Someone who looked at me and saw a person worth saving." She turned around. They were close, closer than they had ever been in this compound's careful, staffed spaces. He was looking up at her, and she was looking at him, and the distance between them was the kind of distance that vibrates with everything unsaid. "You are going to break my heart," she whispered. "I know it." "No," he said, very certain. "I am not." She looked at him for a long, suspended moment. The garden was completely still, and then she reached out and placed her palm against his face, gently, the way you touch something you are afraid might not be real. His eyes closed. His hand came up and covered hers. The evening light deepened around them. The world reduced itself, politely, to the size of that garden, and everything they had not said, and everything they had finally, irrevocably, admitted. She was gone before sunrise. Amira had not slept. She had lain in the guest room that Hajia Mariam had quietly arranged, and she had stared at the ceiling and been absolutely, terrifyingly awake with the weight of the previous evening pressing down on her chest. What had she done? She pressed her palms against her face. She was a market girl. She was the daughter of a woman who sold vegetables before her legs gave out. She was the sister of a 16-year-old who needed school fees. She had no business in this compound, no business in this family, no business looking at Zaid Ibrahim in a garden as if the distance between their worlds could simply decide to not exist. He would see that by morning. The morning always showed people the truth of the night. She took her things. She left through the side gate before anyone was awake. She walked home through the early gray streets, and she told herself it was the right decision. She avoided his calls for 3 days. On the 4th day, Adamu came to her with something urgent in his face. He sat down across from her and placed a handwritten sheet of paper on the table between them. Notes, a name, a timeline, a conversation he had had with a man near the waterfront 2 weeks earlier. "The attendant," Adamu said, "the one who left Zaid alone at the bank." Amira looked at the page. Her eyes moved. She read. "Bashir," she said. And behind Bashir, Adamu pointed to a line near the bottom, a name she knew, Rakia Ibrahim. The room was very quiet. "It was arranged," Amira said. "It was arranged," her brother said. She sat with this for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone. She did not call Zaid. She called the number on the card. Hajia Mariam came to the side gate within the hour. She read Adamu's notes without speaking. When she finished, she folded the paper carefully. What was in her eyes was not surprise. It was the grief of confirmation. "Will you take this to your husband tonight?" Amira said. "Yes," Hajia said. "Tonight." She looked at Amira. Whatever you ran from 3 days ago, she said quietly, I do not think you will find it has disappeared while you have been away. Al-Haji confronted Rakia that same evening. She deflected brilliantly at first. She always did. Years of practice had made her extraordinary at rearranging the truth without technically lying. But Adamu's notes were specific, and the attendant's partial confession was now on record. And Al-Haji Usman Ibrahim had not built an empire by being unable to recognize when a story had been carefully shaped. He found Faisal alone afterward. The boy was 20 years old and had been carrying something he was not built to carry since the day the wheelchair went into the water. He tried to hold the same line as his mother. He held it for approximately 4 minutes. Then it broke. You always said he was a problem, Faisal said, his voice cracking in the middle. You said if he stayed, I would get nothing. You said the business, the name, everything. You said he was in the way. Stop, Al-Haji said. Quiet. Final. He looked at his younger son, and he saw for the first time what the structure of his own life, the shame, the silence, the hidden disability, the competition for his attention that he had allowed to fester for a decade, had done to a 20-year-old who had simply been trying to please a mother who had told him his happiness required his brother's removal. He left the room and went directly to Zaid's. He sat down beside his bed, not at a desk, not across a meeting table, beside the bed, the way he had not sat since Zaid was 9 years old. He told him everything. He did not protect himself in the telling. He was 61 years old, and he was tired of managing the distance between himself and his son. Zaid listened without expression. When Al-Haji finished, the silence was enormous. Then Zaid said, I know you didn't plan it. Al-Haji exhaled slowly. But you built a house where someone thought they could, Zaid said. His voice was quiet, not shouting. That was what made it land the way it did. Because you never made it clear that I was worth protecting. Not to your staff, not to your other wife, not to yourself. He paused. And the person who made me understand that I was worth protecting had nothing to gain from it. Nothing at all. The room was quiet for a long time. Outside, somewhere in the compound, a door closed. The ordinary sounds of the house continued without knowing what had changed inside it. Then Zaid said, I need to find her. I know, his father said. The following morning, Zaid was at the market before it opened. He came alone. One vehicle, parked at the lane's entrance. He waited at Amira's stall in the pre-dawn gray, and when she arrived with Adamu carrying the stock, she stopped 20 feet away and looked at him for a long moment. Adamu very quietly took the stock and moved to the next lane. Amira walked to her stall. She began setting up without speaking. He did not speak either. He stayed, helped where he could reach, handed things over when her hands were full. The first light of morning came up over the market lane and turned everything amber and ordinary and real. After a while she said, You knew about the threat before I told you. Yes. Your mother had people watching me. Yes. She looked at him. And you didn't tell me because you didn't want me to feel controlled. Yes. She was quiet. That was the right decision, she said finally. He let out a slow breath. She looked at him directly. The morning light was full and gold, and behind them the market was beginning to fill with sound and movement. I left because I was afraid, she said. Not of you, of what you make me feel. It is very inconvenient. Something moved in his eyes that was close to a smile and far beyond it. I know, he said. I am still a market girl, she said. That does not change. I know, he said again. Then say what you came to say, she said. He looked at her. I came to tell you that I am in love with you, he said, straightforwardly, without conditions, and that I am going to spend however much time is necessary proving that the distance between your world and mine is a problem that can be solved, because every other problem in my life that anyone told me was unsolvable turned out to be a matter of deciding that it was not. She looked at him for a long time. The market opens in 20 minutes, she said. I know. Come back this afternoon, she said. His expression was everything. The public reckoning came the following week. Al-Haji Usman Ibrahim issued a statement, not through his communications team, not through carefully managed media channels, but in his own voice. In a press gathering, he called himself at Ibrahim Group headquarters. He spoke for 7 minutes. He acknowledged his son. He named Zaid as co-director of Ibrahim Group. He announced that Kuwa, the startup his son had built in private, would be launched under the Ibrahim Group umbrella, with Zaid as its chairman. He did not explain the years of invisibility. He simply ended them. Rakia was asked to leave the compound the same day. Faisal, who had broken and confessed in full, was sent to his mother's family in another state. Bashir was handed to the authorities. And on the Ibrahim Group's main billboard above the road that ran past the market district, the one Amira had passed every single morning for 3 years, a new design went up 3 days later. 2 faces now. Alhaji Usman Ibrahim and his son, Zaid Ibrahim, Kuwa, to exist, building tomorrow, together. Amira walked past it on her way to the market. She stopped. She looked at it for a long time. The morning was ordinary around her. Okadas passing, vendors calling, the city beginning its day. She looked at the face on the billboard. He was not smiling dramatically. He simply looked like himself. Which was, she thought, probably the first time he had appeared in public as himself in a very long time. She walked on to her stall. The following months moved the way significant things move, not all at once, but with the cumulative force of small moments compounding into something undeniable. Zaid visited the market every week, not to buy anything, to sit with her, to talk, to be present in the ordinary life of a woman who had decided that ordinary life was not something to be ashamed of. Her stall neighbors, who had been skeptical, became accustomed to the sight of a wheelchair at the corner of Lane 12, and eventually stopped seeing it as remarkable, and began seeing it simply as part of the morning. Hajia Mariam visited Amira's mother. This happened twice, then regularly, then in the way that relationships between women who respect each other happen, quietly, consistently, without requiring explanation. Adamu received a scholarship notification from a foundation connected to the Ibrahim Group's youth program. He almost refused it. Amira told him plainly that pride was expensive, and they had been paying for it long enough. He accepted. It was Zaid who told her about the renovation. He had acquired, through means he described as a business transaction that also happened to solve a housing problem, a building 2 streets from her mother's current home. Ground floor adapted for accessibility, full medical installation on the upper floor. He explained this to her one evening in the compound garden, in the amber light that had become theirs. She looked at him. "That is too much," she said. "It is a building," he said. "Zaid." Amira. He met her eyes, steady and certain. "You pulled me out of a river. You refused the money. You walked away when it would have been easier to stay, and stayed when it would have been easier to walk away. You looked at me when the rest of the world looked past me." He paused. "Let me look after your family, not as payment, not as transaction, as the simplest expression of who you are to me." She looked at him for a long time. The garden was gold and still and quiet around them. "Ask me the real question," she said softly. He looked up at her. "Amira Sool," he said. "Will you stay?" She reached for his hand. She held it between both of hers. She thought about the billboard and the river and the market stall and the basket of scattered peppers, and 23 years of carrying everything alone. She thought about what it meant to choose someone and be chosen back, fully, without conditions, without the calculation that she had spent her whole life watching people perform in place of the real thing. "Yes," she said, "I will stay." They were married on a Saturday in late November. Not a grand ceremony, though the guest list included people whose names moved industries and opened rooms. Amira had been clear about what she wanted. A gathering that felt like people rather than an event. There were lanterns in the Ibrahim compound garden, the old one with the rose beds, and music that was traditional and real. And her mother sat in the place of honor looking better than she had looked in 3 years, her hands resting in her lap, and her eyes full of the particular quiet pride of a woman watching her daughter become something she always believed she would become. Adamu cried. He denied this afterward. Nobody believed him. Hajia Mariam sat beside Al-Haji, and they did not speak much to each other during the celebration, but they sat close in the way of 2 people who have found their way back through the particular grace of watching their son become himself. Al-Haji looked at Zaid during the ceremony, with an expression that was not comfortable, but was honest, which was, in the end, better than comfortable. Zaid looked at Amira with an expression that needed no translation. She wore gold, and she looked like what she was, the most extraordinary person in the room, not because of what she wore or who she had married, but because of the quality of her presence, which had always been extraordinary and was now simply, finally, visible. 6 months later, on a Tuesday morning, Amira stood in the small bathroom of their home and looked at the result of the test in her hand. She walked out and found Zaid at his desk, going over Kua's quarterly numbers. He looked up when she came in. He looked at her face. He set the papers down. She held up the test. She said nothing. She did not need to. He went very still, and then something moved across his face that was enormous and quiet and far beyond happiness. The expression of a man who had spent years wondering if he was worth saving, and had finally, conclusively, been answered. He reached for her hand. She took his. Outside, the city was going about its day. The market was open. The billboard above the road had two faces on it, and in a small garden 2 streets from a market stall where peppers were still sold every single morning, Hajia Mariam was planting flowers with Amira's mother, their voices low and easy, the sound of 2 women who had decided that the world, despite everything, was worth tending. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. And that is Titan Tales. Beautiful stories, real emotions, every single week. If this one moved you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs a good story today, and subscribe if you have not already. This is exactly the kind of story we bring to this channel, and the next one is already coming. We will see you there, besties.